This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Welcome to No One Told Us, the podcast that tells the truth about parenting and talks about all the stuff you wish you knew before having kids. I'm your host, Rachael, Shepard-Ohta, and today I am so excited to speak with Ruth Whippman. Ruth is an author, journalist, and cultural critic who writes for the New York Times, amongst other large media outlets. And if you follow me on Instagram, you know that I've been obsessed with her book, BoyMom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity. And it's so pertinent right now. I'm so excited to have this conversation. So Ruth, thank you for making the time for us.
It's such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I got your book. I forget exactly where I saw it first, but I think everybody's been talking lately about adolescence on Netflix.
Yes.
And so this conversation has been very top of mind in the zeitgeist. I also recently read Black Pill, which talks a lot about incel culture and that type of thing. I've been just kind of trying to make sense of what's going on in this country. And your book really helped me to do that. So I'm so excited to dive in. I'd love to just know, I know that you're the mom of 3 boys, but I'd love to know what kind of inspired you to write this type of book.
So I actually had my 3rd son. So I was very, very heavily pregnant, full of pregnancy hormones and fear and all the rest of it, right as the Me Too movement was just exploding online. So there I am, 9.5 months pregnant, and it's just I go through my news feed and it's just more and more examples of men just doing terrible things. Mm-hmm. And, I'm about to become a mom of 3 sons, and I'm just oh God, I'm a feminist. I really support the Me Too movement. I'm really excited that women have this voice and clarity and we're able to speak out about these things. But I'm also feeling so defensive, so shut down, so terrified, just what does it mean to raise a boy in this moment? So that was kind of the catalyst for it. And the book itself is a mix of memoir. So it's my own story, raising 3 boys. And 3 very sort of rambunctious, all the stereotypes boys, those are the kinds of boys that I had. And also just, reporting and research about boyhood in this crazy moment.
I love that you weaved in those stories of your own motherhood. I think it makes the book just feel so real and so relatable to so many of us. I even shared a couple of excerpts and people were like, I'm ordering this right now. This is exactly me. This is exactly how I feel. And I too, throughout the book, actually was really wrestling, as were you. I felt like we were going on this journey together because you kept talking about how you were really struggling with your feminism. And I found that I was too, because the more I read the book, the more I was like, man, maybe men aren't the problem. Maybe it's just culture at large. Patriarchy is harming all of us. And so I loved the one quote in the book that said, you didn't know if you wanted to smash the patriarchy or wrap it up in a blankie. And I actually would love, before we dive in too much into the book, because I have so many questions to get to, but I'm so curious to hear, because I know you're from the UK originally, and I'm so curious to know, did you watch Adolescence? What did you think? And what are the differences or similarities? I was actually surprised that it was a British show, because I feel I guess this is just the American in me talking. I think it's all about me and all about us. But I was surprised that this is a problem that's not just in America, right?
Yeah. So I have watched Adolescence, obviously. And, it's an amazing show. It's in terms of if that kid, if he doesn't win every award going there, he's just a phenomenal performer. The writing's beautiful. Just, it's as a piece of art, I think it's wonderful. And it really does bring up a lot of the same issues that I looked at in BoyMom. I have a whole chapter where I look at incel culture, which is obviously a big part of the show. And so I think some things in the show absolutely resonated with my research and I felt were absolutely right. I think there were other things that I felt were less realistic in the show in terms of actual real life incel culture and these pathways from normal boyhood to horrific violence. I think maybe it was a little overstated in in the show. Funnily enough, I think the British American thing is interesting because I think what makes American culture so unique is our gun culture here, or the gun culture in the United States. So I think it is much easier for a boy to go from, regular schoolboy to mass murderer, very, very quickly. I think the idea that, because in adolescence, this kid is accused of stabbing a female classmate to death, which I think is a lot. I think that's pretty unrealistic that a 13-year-old boy would do something quite that kind of hands-on type of violence, that's not so distant. But, these are all, it was television. It's not supposed to be exactly realistic. And a lot of the underlying issues that it was looking at are really things that I came across too.
Yeah, no, I actually really agree with you. I had the same thought. And in the episode where he's talking with the child psychologist, I was kind of like, oh, there's more to this kid. Like, this isn't just that he became radicalized online. Like, there's some deep stuff here.
Yeah. And so I think I sort of I've been trying to reassure parents a little bit because people have been coming to me and saying, is this, could my lovely sweet son who loves art and, talking to us and is very, very sweet and 13 years old, could they really just go online and within a few days be radicalized into becoming a murderer? And I'm like,
right.
No, not that this phenomenon doesn't exist and that, there aren't pathways to extreme fringe ideologies and violence and all the rest of it. But I think as depicted there, it was a little bit far-fetched, honestly.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I think a lot of moms, especially moms of little ones, where we're still just like, oh my God, they're so sweet and innocent. Could this really happen? It's like terrifying.
This really going to happen overnight. I know. And I think, I think there's a lot of fear-mongering. And the thing that worries me as well, and especially as a mom of boys, is just it's very easy to go from watching adolescents to sort of really demonizing boys and just adding to this sense of that, that they're these kind of violent, terrible, toxic, that there's something really inherently wrong with them. And, the show was more nuanced than that, but I've seen some of the surrounding conversation be a little less, what is going wrong for boys and how are boys being harmed in this system and how are we failing boys, and a little bit more of the kind of boys are terrible, boys are evil, boys are demon, which I don't think is really helpful for anyone, especially when we're talking about children.
Right. And you mentioned in the book how early that starts, right? Like with gender disappointment and people hearing you're having a boy and they say, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I hope you get a girl next. Or it really starts so early. What was your experience with that, especially with 3?
Yeah, well, when I was pregnant with my third son, I think I'd had a little bit of it all along. Even with the first one, it was a bit like, oh, boy, they can be sweet, but, better luck next time, a little bit. And then by number 2, more of that. And by number 3, it was almost like condolences when I said that I was pregnant with a third boy. They were like, oh, and you could see sort of people were like slightly backing away from me as if it was like catching or something to have 3 boys. And, there were all these articles in the press and it was like with all these headlines like, it's a boy and it's okay that you're disappointed or, I think there was one in the New York Times that was like wanting daughters, getting sons. And there was this sort of sense that at least in our little liberal urban bubble that boys were somehow second best.
Yeah, I see that online all the time. And I think, the conversation around just a gender disappointment is one thing, but it's like this broader societal thing where it's like, oh God, like good luck.
Yeah.
And I was also so shocked, and I guess I shouldn't be shocked, but I was shocked when you started talking about the statistics of low nurture and low touch for boys during infancy. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, so this was really surprising to me, but it kind of actually makes sense when you start to think about it. So it's really bound up in 2 things. So I started looking at the nature versus nurture question. And, when we think about this idea of boys will be boys, it's almost like this idea that boys are destructive or aggressive or naturally badly behaved. But what I found when I looked into the research was that boys are actually born more emotionally sensitive and fragile and more vulnerable to disruption than girls are. So a baby boy's brain at birth is around a month to 6 weeks behind a baby girl's. This is something I didn't know about, but there's quite a wide body of research to support this. And this is in the kind of the right hemisphere of the brain, so more of the emotional centers. So boys get more distressed. They take a little longer to calm down. They need more support from their caregivers. By and large, these are averages, obviously, rather than every single individual. But so they need a little more care and they're more vulnerable. But because of our ideas about masculinity and who boys are and what they need, we end up giving them slightly less nurturing care. So, we kind of throw baby boys up in the air and say, hey there, little man, and we roughhouse with them and we kind of try to toughen them up. Whereas little girls tend to get a lot more like emotional and nurturing care. And there's a lot of studies about this. So you can see in the studies that we talk to baby girls more. We listen to their emotions and, listen to them talking. Parents are more likely to respond to a baby girl than to a baby boy, and just to chat back to their sounds, when girls, and that goes on through preschool and beyond, like when girls talk about their emotions, parents are more willing to listen. We give slightly more focused attention to girls. There's all these studies on dads and on moms where they comfort baby girls more than baby boys. They're a bit more like, they hold them in closer proximity. And so there's, these are like small differences, but they add up over time. And we can kind of see it, I think there is a way which we see boys as like tough and sturdy and robust. So I think this becomes like a double whammy. It's like they need a little more, they get a little less. And then over time, this adds up to quite a big difference.
One piece of the book that I, of course, resonated so much with was how you talked about sleep training. And it sounded so much like my experience with my son and sleep training him and like kind of what set me off on this whole new career path in the first place. But it's like you said, like they actually need more. And then there's like the neurodivergent piece when you throw that in, it's like a deeper layer, which we can get into later. But yeah, I just really resonated with so much of that. We're going to talk a little bit more about things that you said in the book when it comes to male violence and toxic masculinity. We will be right back.
Monday Sidekick, the AI agent that knows you and your business, thinks ahead and takes action. Ask it anything. Seriously. Monday Sidekick, AI you'll love to use. Start a free trial today on monday.com.
I can't even tell you how overwhelmed I get when I'm planning out our month with sports schedules, work things, meetings, appointments, all the things that go into the monthly schedule for a busy family, right? You guys know too. And if your brain is already at full capacity with all of the to-dos and errands and birthdays, not to mention the dinner plans for every day, let's let Skylight handle that. I cannot even tell you how much I love my new Skylight calendar. Skylight is a Wi-Fi connected digital display that can basically seamlessly integrate with Google Calendar, Apple Calendars, Outlook, and more. You'll be able to manage events, chores, grocery lists, everything you need to run your household, and even assign a color for each of your family members. So it is so easy to just look at the calendar and know who's got what going on that day. They also have amazing customer service, and your happiness is Skylight's happiness. If in 120 days you're not 100% thrilled with your purchase, you can return it for a full refund with no questions asked, so there's really nothing to lose. And right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to myskylight.com/notu, N-O-T-U. So go to myskylight.com/NOTU for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's the one we have. That's myskylight.com/notu. So Ruth, one quote that I highlighted in your book among a million that I kept thinking about throughout was, boys aren't mad, they're sad. I want to unpack this with you a little bit because I think some critics, maybe some feminists, maybe some men would say that's not it. Like that's giving it a pass. Men have so much to be mad about. They're mad. Other people might say, so what if they're sad? Girls get sad too, and they don't commit these horrible acts of violence at such a rate, right? So I'm curious about your thought process about putting that in the book, talking about it in that way, framing it in that way. Is this giving a pass, or is this really just the humanization that's necessary for us to make change?
So I think what I said in the book was that we tend to see boys as bad and not sad. And I think this is like partly, this is a really, really complex phenomenon, but we project a lot of like, when we talk about the crisis of boyhood, we talk about bad behavior, we talk about underachievement, we talk about violence, we talk about all these things. And we sort of, when we talk about problems with girls, we tend to talk about like mental health problems or, you know, struggles that girls are having with anxiety or depression. But what ends up happening is I think this can become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I interviewed a lot of boys, you know, adolescent boys for BoyMom. And they were telling me a lot of the time that they really were sad. They were really struggling with these feelings of depression, but they felt that they had nowhere to turn and they felt like they couldn't, you know, they weren't allowed to own these. They weren't allowed to be emotionally vulnerable with other people, especially with male peers. And really the only emotions that we allow them are like anger and happiness. So it's like they were saying to me, you know, you can be happy or you can be angry. Those are your options. And like being sort of sad or emotional or confused or bewildered or all that, you know, huge range of emotions was something that we didn't really allow boys to feel, that we didn't really have time for. And there's all these studies. There's this really interesting classic study that when it's with babies, and they dressed babies neutrally. So it's like the adults couldn't tell if they were holding a boy or a girl. And they gave them to adults to take care of. And they really kind of randomized the gender. So they would tell some people they were holding a boy and some people that they were holding a girl, irrespective of the actual biological sex of the child. And when people were told that they were holding a baby boy, when that boy cried, they perceived his cries as anger. They described him as angry. But when they were told they were holding a girl, when that girl cried, they perceived her as sad or distressed. So already we're like projecting these masculine qualities onto boys right from birth. And then there are other studies that show that that same phenomenon exists all the way through. And because we don't allow boys other healthier ways to express their emotions, it becomes kind of true that emotional problems actually do get channeled more into like behavioral problems, like externalizing problems. So then we respond with more discipline and less kind of nurture and less emotions. And it becomes this vicious cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really interesting too, because I read about that study in the book and went to look at it, and it was just fascinating to me. And it actually made so much sense. And I even thought of like, you know, my in-laws or my parents, like, and things that they say about my son versus my daughters. And like, it really does start just like from day one, those things that we just assign to them. And it's just so interesting. And then I was also thinking like, okay, but misogyny isn't exactly a new phenomenon.
Yeah.
So why is it, and I know this is such a huge answer, this is why people should read the full book, but why do you think this is such a big issue now? Why is this like a tipping point in our culture and our time right now? Why are men in such trouble? Do you think that it's screen time? Do you think that it's politics? All of the above? What would you say is like the main cause for such an uprising right now?
Yeah, so I think a lot of things are coming together in this moment that are creating almost like a perfect storm for this angry, violent, lonely culture. And so I think boys are feeling pretty shut down from all sides. So I think they're still held to these very old standards of masculinity, which are like, be strong, be tough, be aggressive, be dominant, you know, don't show your emotions, don't show weakness, don't show vulnerability, which is quite a psychologically unhealthy thing we now know anyway. But it's still very present in boys' lives. But now, you know, there's this sort of newer narrative coming often from the left, which is like, shut up, you're so privileged, you're so powerful, you don't have any problems. As Richard Reeves calls it, you know, you don't have any problems, you are the problem. You know, you're toxic, you're a predator, we're just waiting for you to do harm, which is also really psychologically unhealthy. So it's like, on the one hand, they're told, you know, man up. On the other hand, they're told, shut up. You know, they feel very shut down in all levels. And then throw into that the digital era where, you know, it's very fraught to be in the real world. And it's very easy to avoid it by going online, you know, submerging yourself in the internet. You know, it's so much easier in this moment with Me Too and everything to turn to, say, porn rather than like asking a girl out in real life, you know, and that phenomenon is mirrored. So, and I think then the algorithms, the big tech companies, allow these like rabbit holes. This is the kind of thing we saw in adolescence where, I think the New York Times did a study that if a teenage boy types into his search bar, fitness videos or something like a little bit male coded, within 10 minutes, he's being shown manosphere, anti-feminist, misogynistic content. And so I think all these things come together. They're feeling a lack of connection. They're feeling a lack of belonging in the real world. And then the tech world comes in and just amplifies the problem.
Yeah, you're right. It's like a perfect storm is the perfect way to describe it. There's so many things happening at once. And I had to just think about throughout the book, like, is this why Trump won? Like, you also talked so much about this sense of belonging, right? Like Aaron, a young man you wrote about, was in Iron Gate. He just wanted to feel safe and heard and feel like he had a place to belong and have a community. And I can't help but think like that's what these young men are getting from MAGA.
Yeah. So they're getting a sense of self-worth, like a very twisted sense of self-worth. But I think so many boys are feeling like in the real world, they can't speak to their own pain. They can't speak to their emotions, whether that's from like, because they need to man up and be tough and not own their emotions on the one hand, or whether it's because like politically they feel like it's not their turn to speak, that they're being shut down in that way. And so I think that these bad actors online are really like exploiting that. What I found was really interesting was I spent a lot of time in incel chat rooms and interviewing incels directly. And it was a really, really fascinating experience because online on these forums, there is the most toxic, misogynistic, horrific stuff you can possibly imagine. But also there's this real sense of like brotherhood and vulnerability and tenderness in these online communities, often where these guys are anonymous. They feel like they can speak to their pain in a way that they can't in real life. So they are going online and getting a lot of support. And it was so weird because I was interviewing so many different boys and, doing all this reporting and looking for spaces where men and boys could be vulnerable with each other. I never expected to find it in the world of incels and like toxic masculinity online, but they are actually getting that kind of stuff in these groups. And so I think we mustn't like ignore that. That this is a desperate need that boys and men have. They're, because they can't find it in the real world, they're finding it online.
Right. It's so interesting to hear you talk about that because it's like, well, they're also being fed like Nazi propaganda and like all this insane stuff in there. But like at the core of it, they just want to feel seen and heard and they want to feel that sense of belonging. So we need to do a better job in the real world. That way in the real world.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, especially in this moment, we're like doing a lot of telling boys that they suck, basically, that they're awful, that they're harmful, that they're predators, that they're toxic. And, what does it do to a young boy who's growing up trying to develop his sense of self, his sense of self-esteem, his sense of community, to be told that he is inherently harmful as a human being? I think it's incredibly psychologically unhealthy. And as adults, we need to take the lead, I believe, in doing better.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I wrote this on Instagram or maybe in my Substack piece, but I was like, I had to take a good long look in the mirror after this book because I was like, I'm a feminist and yes, I have a boy, but I also have 2 girls and I was raised with sisters and like, I'm just very like girl power, men suck, boys drool, like all of that kind of stuff.
Same. Same. Absolutely. And I was 100% on board with all that stuff. And then raising boys, I was like, hang on a second.
Right.
What are we telling them? And these are children. We have to remember that there is a big difference between talking about Harvey Weinstein or talking about Elon Musk and talking about a 6 or even a 15-year-old, 16-year-old boy. These are children.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love how you also talked about, and I would love for you to share any other thoughts on this of like, how do we hold men and boys accountable without shutting them down and just making them spiral into shame because that's not going to get anybody anywhere. So do you have ideas for how we do that?
Yeah. Well, so in the book, I write that like boyhood is a weird combination of indulgence and neglect. So on the one hand, we really kind of indulge boys and men. Like boys do less chores. Did you know that? They do less chores in the household and they get paid more money for chores, So we indulge them. We let them get away with things. We don't task them with like emotional labor, with like writing the thank you letters, with like, is grandma okay? Is your friend okay? We just we don't expect much of them. But at the same time, we kind of neglect them emotionally. So I think we need to kind of reverse those and do more to hold them accountable just in these simple things like doing the dishes and, you know, doing the emotional labor, you know, thinking about friends, thinking of others in a way that we really expect girls to in a very natural way. So that side of things. But also we need to give them the care and nurture and attention that they are so sorely lacking. You cannot shame somebody into becoming a better human being. It just doesn't work. It never works. You have to do it with like compassion and care and curiosity.
Yeah. And modeling too. And I think, you know, that's a lot easier said than done, maybe in like more progressive homes. Like my kids have never seen me wash a dish or fold the laundry. That's all my husband. But like not every household is that way.
It's like that. Yeah. Right. And it's hard. You know, we're all learning these things as we go. You know, we don't live in a perfect world. But, you know, there's one guy that I interviewed at the Teen Therapy Center. He was like, do it imperfectly. You know, don't wait for the perfect moment and the perfect situation and, you know, do nothing until you get that, because you're never going to get that. We're all, you know, we're all just doing this as we go. We're all doing it on the fly. None of us are perfect, but we got to try. You know, let's make an attempt.
Absolutely. And yeah, at the end of the episode, I want to talk more through like the practical things we can do at home, because most of our listeners have still very little boys. But I do want to ask you first about school. So I don't know if you know this. I don't know why you would, but I am a former educator. So before this, I was a teacher in public schools for 10 years up in Marin.
Wow.
And I taught special education. I, in my grad school, remember reading a book called Shame of the Nation, and it was all about the achievement gap between white students and students of color. And I just remember being horrified and like, oh my God, this is insane. How is this still happening? Like, what can we do to change it? And so it was so interesting for me to read your book in the section on school about the achievement gap, but how it's actually now, I mean, Black and brown students are obviously still disadvantaged in many ways in school, but there's a huge gap now between male and female students. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yeah. And the way that it intersects with race is really, really interesting and really important. So yes. So, it used to be the case that girls like did a little bit better at reading and boys did a little bit better at math. And now, girls have overtaken boys in math, in reading, in everything, at every grade level, at every stage, from kindergarten through to college and grad school and beyond. And now around 60% of college entrants are girls, you know, to the point where they're doing this kind of affirmative action for white men or, you know, for men to get into college, because there's so few applicants, you know, that actually you have to be better as a girl to get into college now than you do as a boy, which is, you know, makes a mockery of what affirmative action was there for. But, you know, boys are struggling in school and they are falling further and further behind girls. And there are a lot of reasons for this. And the race thing, like Black boys are doing, the worst of all. And, you know, there are various reasons for this. What was really fascinating is in many domains, Black girls are actually doing better than white boys. Right. So Black girls are graduating from high school at higher rates. They're going to college at higher rates. They're going, to, you know, doing grad school at higher rates than white boys. So that really turns on our head, like what we think about as like racial privilege and gender privilege, you know, and what these things mean. So I think that there are lots of reasons why boys are falling behind. And, you know, a big piece of it, it's not about intelligence, basically. It's about diligence and behavior, really, are the reasons why, you know, why boys aren't succeeding in the classroom.
What do you think schools can do? Like, if there are educators listening, hopefully, what do you think schools can do to help our boys kind of catch up and close that gap? I know social emotional learning programs are really great to teach boys about, you know, behavior and emotional regulation and friendships and all of that. But those programs are getting cut from so many schools.
I know. And this is a really, really sad thing. So one of the things in general, not just for boys, but like social emotional, skills are such a big predictor of academic success. I had no idea. I thought like social emotional skills were totally separate from academic success, but they are not. And this is one of the big reasons for the gender gap, because by the time they get to kindergarten, girls have a huge head start than boys on like relational and social emotional skills, you know, in the way that we teach them to girls in the home. There's all these studies that show that and also on pre-academic skills. There's all these studies that show that parents actually spend more time with little girls doing things like reading, singing songs, drawing pictures, learning letters and numbers, etc., than they do with boys, which also surprised me. But the social emotional gap is the biggest one. And so by the time they get to kindergarten, there's a really big difference between a 5-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. And some of that is like brain maturity, but some of that is also socialization. So, yeah, I mean, I think parents can do a lot in the home to try to foster those skills. And I think that, I feel so much empathy for teachers in this moment. They're just absolutely, they're so overworked, they're so overloaded, to think, oh, we're going to add another thing to their plate. But honestly, prioritizing those social emotional skills in the classroom will make a huge difference across the board.
Yeah, it's a great investment to make. The other thing was literature. Like my son is a first grader and he's starting to get into graphic novels and all of that kind of stuff. So when you started talking about how there's so few books that are marketed towards boys about things like friendship and relationship, it is all I see now. I went to the library with him the other day and we were in the graphic novel section and all of like the pink unicorn princess books are all about like friendships and fun, sweet things. And all the boys ones are like battle. And it's crazy.
So true. And it's like, I mean, I remember the when it kind of hit me, I was in the bookstore with my, sons and I saw this like magazine and it was, it was obviously marketed towards girls, like pink sparkly cover and like friendship bracelet giveaway. And it was this story about, the first story in the magazine was this story about this girl, and she had been invited to these 2 birthday parties that were happening at the same time. And she was really worried that she was going to disappoint one of her 2 friends. So she was like doing this really elaborate thing where she was running between the 2 parties and she'd like do the games at one, then like sneak off around the back and go to the other house and like do the games there and then sneak back to the other one for the cake and whatever. And this is like really high octane emotional labor, and it's something that we never ask of boys. There will never be a story of, or my sons will never have read a story with a character like that who is a boy, who's worrying about, his friends' birthday parties. It just doesn't exist. And I realized, yes, these friendship narratives are so prevalent in girls' lives. They have it modeled to them. And with boys, it's like all battles. There's a winner, there's a loser, there's a hero and a villain. Somebody's crowned in glory and someone gets killed. And that's the whole story. So that's their model for human relationships. So it's no wonder that they don't, have that more complex understanding of social emotional stuff, or that they feel it's their responsibility to like look out for their friends in that way. And I think we can all kind of, many of us can extrapolate that to adulthood. I look at my friendships and we're all checking in on each other all the time and doing stuff for each other. And my husband's friends, they'll talk about sports, they'll talk about music, they'll talk about their hobbies, but they don't really like interact in that emotional way at all.
Right. Yeah, no. And I think the modeling piece, like you mentioned, I've done a few episodes for this podcast on female friendships and like how we can get deeper friendships as moms and things like that. And I'm like, what about dads though? Like what kind of friendships are dads modeling? And that part is just so interesting to me. And just quickly, while we're speaking about dads, I got a lot of messages from people asking like, do you know of a similar book that's for dads? And I'm like, read this one. Tell them to read this one. Like it's called BoyMom, but it doesn't have to be BoyMom. Like boy dads, please read this book too. I'm having my husband read it. And he says, I mean, he's a very like emotional, he's a Cancer and he's very, in tune with his emotions. He's like a therapist. So it's, but he still says that it's so validating because it talks about not just, your kids, but also your experience as a man in our society. So just wanted to put that plug out there for dads.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I've been really surprised because I thought, with a title like BoyMom, I was like, no man is ever going to read this book. They're never going to touch it, but whatever. And then I have had so many messages from men who've read the book and it's been really moving to me actually. And often they're not even reading it as dads. They're reading it and seeing themselves in it. It's almost like they're reparenting themselves and being like, oh, this was my experience as a child. And now I can kind of put words to it in a way.
Exactly.
I think they feel validated, which has been really lovely for me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. It's like, it's almost like they're reading it for themselves and to think about their own life. And then the bonus will be how they pass on whatever to their sons and daughters. But the other thing you mentioned in the book, though, is that it's often mothers who are kind of invisible in this whole thing, right? Like there's a lot of books written about being a dad and having boys, and there are a lot of times from the male perspective. But I also feel like, you know, online, I don't see a lot of dads fighting for, you know, these conversations to happen, or showing up at the school boards to talk about social emotional learning, or, you know.
Well, they haven't been socialized to do it. I mean, I think it's sort of, you know, it's part of a really long pattern. And, you know, you can see why it doesn't happen in the same way that I'm not turning up to like fix the faucet or whatever. It's like, because I wasn't socialized to do it, or to have that skill set, or even to really think about that skill set. But obviously, you know, it's harder to ignore, or more unhealthy to kind of ignore social emotional stuff, you know. And so I think this is part going back to the like patriarchy harms men too. You know, I wrote this line in the book, which is like, under patriarchy, boys and men get everything except the thing that's most worth having, which is human connection and intimacy.
That's so true. We're going to leave it there really quick. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about things that parents can do at home. We'll be right back. I don't know about you, but for me, fall always feels like a reset, almost like the beginning of the year, like after New Year, when you can kind of set new routines, get into better habits. And between back to school and shorter days, finding time to cook can be really tough, which is one reason why I love Factor. Their chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals make it easy to stay on track and enjoy something comforting and delicious, no matter how hectic this season gets. And now there's more variety and more meals to choose from, with a wider selection of weekly options, including premium seafood choices like salmon and shrimp at no extra cost. You can support your wellness goals, whether it's a Mediterranean diet or high protein, lots of fiber, and you can savor more global flavors now. So for the first time, there's more Asian-inspired meals with bolder flavors, and they are just absolutely delicious. They're some of our favorites. So from more choices to better nutrition, that's why 97% of customers say that Factor helped them live a healthier life. You'll feel the difference too, no matter what your routine is. And the best part is that it is easy and super, super convenient. You can eat smart too at factormeals.com/no-one-told-us-50 off and use code no-one-told-us-50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free breakfast for an entire year. That's no-one-told-us-50 off at factormeals.com for 50% off your first box plus free breakfast for a year. Get delicious, ready-to-eat meals delivered right to your door with Factor. Offers only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. Towards the end of BoyMom, you give a really helpful kind of roundup of things that we can do as parents, especially if we have younger boys or even girls. One of the things that I love that you mention is kind of just calling it out and naming it. And I think this is something, if we are feminist moms, especially of daughters, this is something we're very used to, because we're always calling out sexism in like Disney movies and things from that point of view. And now we can just shift our thinking a little bit and call it out from the other side as well. Can you talk more about how you do that at your house?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting point, because I think like at the moment, like pretty much any 5th, 6th grade girl can really spot sexism. They're so good at it. They're like, why is the prince rescuing the princess? She can look after herself. And, you know, they have the vocabulary, and boys just don't. I mean, so one recent example was, I don't know if you saw the movie Inside Out.
Yes, love it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wonderful movie. But my only complaint with it was that it's this really complex movie about a girl character and her emotions, her interiority. Like, she's tracking her friends' emotions, her friends are tracking her emotions, her mom is tracking her emotions, she's tracking her mom's emotions, etc., etc. And every time a male character appears on the screen in that movie, they are an emotional idiot. So like when the dad comes on, it's like, duh, and you go inside his head and all the emotions are like checked out, having a beer, feet up on the thing.
That is so true. See, this is what I'm talking about. I didn't even clock that.
Has no idea what's going on. And there's this boy, in the first movie, there's this boy, Jordan, who appears exactly the same thing going on inside his head. And I was watching this with my then 6-year-old and being like, hang on a second, like it's a joke. And I get it. It's like supposed to be funny, but I'm like, what are we telling him? Like, what message are we sending to boys that everyone can have a full emotional life just not them, just not you, you know. And so I paused the movie and I was like, do you think this is fair? Like, do you think dad's an emotional idiot? Do you think that you can't have emotions? Do you think you don't have the same feelings as girls? And then we talked about how he has all the same feelings as Riley, you know, the girl in the thing. And, you know, that it's not done by gender. You know, all humans have these emotions. And I think it was just like calling it out and saying, look, this isn't fair. You're not like that. This is a stereotype. And I think that, you know, as a culture, if that had been a sexist stereotype that was targeting girls and women in a mainstream like Disney movie, I think we would have all spotted it in a heartbeat and called it out and been like, no, you know, you can't have this. And then, you know, you saw actually back in adolescence, you know, the movie that, you know, the dad is so sort of emotionally shut down. He's unable to communicate with his son. All he has is anger to turn to. And so you can see, you know, we're saying, well, we want dads to model these things. But then if we're doing these like ridiculous stereotypes about dads on screen and you see the TV dad everywhere. So that's one example. You know, there's a million of them. Like I saw the Babysitters Club. It's a Netflix show. And again, it's like, this is a book from the 80s, I think, you know, based on a book. And, you know, if there was a book called like Science Club and Netflix were making a new version of it for TV, and had it been like 4 boys in the original from the 80s doing science, they would put a girl in that group. They 100% would.
They'd have
so
to.
It's like,
yeah.
They'd have to, right? And it would be sexist not to. But here, it not only is there no boy in evidence, but they're making all these comments about boys and being like, oh, boys are dumb, boys can't babysit, boys are da. And it just has a complete pass. And so again, you know, I was watching it with my sons and I was like, do you think that's right? Why can't boys babysit? You know, and I name a few boys that do babysit. And so it's just a case of like pointing this out when it happens. Like, why can't the boys be friends? Why are there no boys in this? Or why is everything always a battle? Or, you know, just, and again, you don't want to be too heavy handed about it because then they switch off, but just like a little bit,
oh, Mom.
you know?
Yeah,
just
no,
enough.
for sure. And I think, that was going to be the next thing I talk about was like, how do we expose them to stories of friendship and boyhood that's a little bit more than just guns and, you know, cannons and swords and all of that stuff. Do you have any favorite books or shows or movies that your boys like?
So, you know, there are some. So, actually, I just, I don't know if you know the series Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls.
Yes, we love those.
Yeah. So the author of that just came out with a new book called Stellar Stories for Boys of the Future. Oh, cool. And it's trying really hard to like reimagine fairy tales without the stereotypes and giving boys like a full emotional life. And, you know, but it's done with that because some of those books, I think they're at an early stage. So some of them can be very like didactic or like boys can cry. And the boys are like, well, I don't think I can, you know, it's sort of almost like feeding them the message before they've had it, you know, and so they're so clunky or they don't have so much of a story. So this one's lovely because it's, you know, they're fairy tales. They're really good stories and fun. There's an author called Gordon Corman who writes books for more like middle grade readers. And they have boys in that have like more complex friendships, which is really nice. And they have those kind of real life stories. There's another book called Wonder. I don't know if you've heard of that one. It's also a movie.
That sounds familiar. Yes.
It's about a boy. He has a like quite serious facial disfigurement.
Yes.
But it's really about his internal life and, you know, he's a full human being. He's a full person in the way that we're used to seeing girl characters in books. So, so that's
Okay. So talk to me about screen time because this was something you spent a lot of time kind of unpacking in the book, which I really appreciated because there's such black and white thinking about screen time in parenting right now. It's
and
we feel so guilty for it, but
yeah, I mean, especially with little kids, I'm like, you know, so much of the screen time debate, I think, has sort of focused on parents and like banning screens. And like, I feel like we should be looking at this in a slightly more systemic way. Like most of us use screens because we don't have affordable childcare and we need to do things. And like, it's $800 a month to put them in aftercare. And, you know, if we had a social safety net, we probably wouldn't need screens. In the meantime, most of us, when we have toddlers, do need them. I mean, some people can parent without them. Great. That's never been my experience. And
depends
also
on the temperaments of your kids, for sure.
Exactly. And like, I had 3 very
and how many you have. Yeah.
And it was, you know, without the screens, I think I would have gone crazy. So I don't want to like ban screens. And like for older kids, they use them to communicate with their friends. They do a lot of good things. They research things. They do their homework. You know, I think it's unrealistic to be like, okay, no screens for most of us anyway. And if you can do that, great. But if, you know, but for me, I think this trend that we saw, or that I really came across, was like boys especially like replacing real life socializing with screen-based socializing. Right. And that is something that's really worrying. And so I think it's not that the screens themselves are bad. It's not bad to play video games or whatever it is. It's just, for me, it's been about like adding stuff in, like prioritizing real world connection. So they can have the screen time, but they also have to do the other thing too. And like seeing social connection with their same age peers as important or more important even than like homework or brushing their teeth or all these other things that we don't say, okay, well, I'm just not going to bother with that, you know?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And like, that's kind of my philosophy with little kids too. It's like screen time is fine in moderation. Like as long as it's not taking away playing outside and, you know, having time to look at books and like having time to connect with you and like real experiences. I think that's exactly. Key.
And honestly, I think that, you know, in some ways screens made me a better parent in the sense that I got a break and then I could go back and, you know, be with them and be more present. So
yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. The other thing you talk about, like more of a adding in versus taking away, is toys. And I love that you talk about your husband playing with the dolls and the doll. That is so cute.
I have a funny story about that actually, because my husband was doing this, like he had these two little action figures and he was trying to act out a story with my youngest. And he's like, he was doing it slightly like with a side eye towards me, but he was like, let's talk about our feelings. And so he had an action figure and my 7-year-old had an action figure and he's like, what do you want to do? My son, and my husband's made his action figure go, you know, sir, I want to talk about my feelings. And my son made his action figure go, what do you think I am, your therapist? So I'm like, they've obviously got the lingo. But oh my God. Yeah, I mean, toys, again, like my kids, they went with all the stereotypes. They loved the Nerf guns. They loved the action, you know, the most, everything that's the most violent, the most everything that they craved. And, you know, I grew up with a feminist mother in the like 1980s, late 1970s, 1980s. And she was like, no Barbies, no pink. And I think in a way it did kind of make me like really crave that stuff more. So I haven't been like, let's forbid anything. It's just more like, let's get some other stuff in the mix too.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when my oldest is my boy, so I only had him at the time, and he was a baby, and I bought him a baby doll before I bought him a truck. I was like, we will not be, but you know what? That boy loved trucks for years.
Yeah. And
some of it's just inborn, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. I know. I mean, I think one of the academics that I interviewed, she was just like, parenting makes people into such gender essentialists, because I think that's so many people's experience. It's like, I gave them the dolls and they wanted the trucks. And it's like, great, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with trucks. Trucks are great.
And they can have both, right?
Yeah, they can have both.
The last thing that I think it's really important for parents, especially parents of babies and little ones, to hear is about nurture. And one of the things that you talk about at the end of the book was this interaction you had with one of your children's teacher, how it was a male teacher, and he was greeting all of the students, and he would say, hi, sweetheart, to the girls. And then he got to your son and he said, hey, buddy. Yeah. And I was just like, oh, that was just like a gut punch. Not that there's anything wrong with buddy, but it just really, it really shows like how we are so much more nurturing and loving buddy, towards girls. Yeah.
And like, it wasn't even like, hi, buddy. It was like, hey, buddy, you know, like a really different, like the whole tone of voice, the whole body language, you know, it was like high five. And I think, you know, both buddy and sweetheart come with their problems and their like sweetnesses as well. You know, there's nothing wrong with either of them. But I think, you know, we're communicating to girls, you know, maybe it's like a little bit patronizing to call someone sweetheart, but it's very nurturing. And it's really saying, you know, your emotions are okay. Your fear is okay. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to nurture you. Whereas like buddy, it's like, we're going to get a beer after this, you and me. And, you know, and this kid is like 5 years old walking into kindergarten for the first time. He's every bit as anxious and in need of nurture as any girl walking in, you know, to school. So.
Absolutely. And I mean, we talked about dads a little bit earlier, but I guess my final kind of thought or question is, you know, for so many dads, this way of raising boys feels so foreign because it's not how they were raised. We're also just living in a very misogynistic culture and time right now.
Yeah.
So how do you suggest getting men more on board with treating their sons this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think reading the book has been really helpful for, I mean, you know, obviously I would say that, but I think a lot of men can kind of see the narrative unfold and the logic unfold in a way that is like really hard to just communicate in a couple of sentences, and see the harms and the evidence for it, and see themselves in it. I think also just like, often women, I've had like moms be really frustrated with their partners and they're like, do this and da, da, da. And it's like, you know, they're just at their wit's end and they feel like, why do I have to do all this work? And I relate to that really strongly. But at the same time, I think we do better generally trying to like approach people with curiosity and like, why are you worried about this? Like, what was your experience growing? What does it mean to be a boy? What were you allowed and not allowed? What did it feel like to be like that? And just have curiosity about their experience as boys and why. Because I think it's a source of real fear for men. You know, they're not doing this to their sons because they don't love them. They're doing it because they do love them. And they think that they need to be tough to survive, you know, in this world. But actually, I think, you know, care and nurture makes us tougher rather than less tough.
Yeah, absolutely. What is one thing that no one told you before becoming a mom? Final question.
Oh my gosh. I had no idea how hard it was going to be. I mean, I just had absolutely no idea. I know now people talk about this. You know, my first son was born 14 years ago. I was clueless. And it's just not even like anything you can describe. I knew that I would have sleepless nights. I knew that I would have, you know, diaper changes, and I knew that all of this, but it's just something like so intangibly hard about it that, you know, that is like indescribable. I think I just had no idea.
No, it's so true. And there, like you said, there is no way to fully prepare for it. And now I think it's maybe a little bit easier because there's social media and you can kind of see other people's perspectives, but that's also scary too. Yeah,
right.
It's just nothing to quite get you ready for it.
It's
Ruth,
so
this
true.
has been such an amazing conversation. I highly, highly, highly recommend everyone read BoyMom. It is such an incredible book, and I'm just so thrilled. Yeah, I'm so thrilled that you were able to come and chat with us today. Where can people find your book? And I know you have a Substack as well, and all of your other social media.
My book, BoyMom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity, you can buy wherever you buy your books. And I have a Substack, which is I Blame Society, so you can find me on there. Or you can find me on Instagram at Ruth Whippman with 2 Ps.
Perfect. Thank you so, so much again. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much.